I'm a big storyboarder, so I will, before we even start on day one, I will have storyboarded out most of the movie.
Do you storyboard, or do you work with someone, or do you chicken scratch and then have them translate?
Chicken scratch, and if you could see my chicken scratch drawings, you would laugh. You would get up and walk off of this set, Joe, because you would say, I'm not dealing with a serious person. They're literally stick figures. I swear I've gotten worse at drawing over the years. When I try and draw a car, it looks like a cow. It's just ridiculous, but it's giving myself time to visually write the movie, and especially with these films, it's more about conceptualizing the blocking than anything else. These movies have been a real education for me in terms of adjusting my thinking from thinking about shots to thinking about staging. This one in particular, because there are a lot more sequences in Glass Onion than in Knives Out, where it's 9 characters swirling around a space talking to each other.
Well, I noticed your camera is very active in this film, and it's always pointing the audience, telling them what to look at, telling them what to be aware of, telling them what's important. There's a lot of movement in the camera. There's a lot of pushing in for moments. There's pulling back to reveal a second piece of dialogue. Is that more than you've done on previous films? Is that a newer thing for you? Is that you kind of growing into a new style? And how much of that is figured out on the day versus ahead of time?
I mean, the vast majority of it is figured out ahead of time. I mean, I feel like that's something that I've always tried to engage with, but, and I kind of, I mean, Spielberg, the Coen brothers, all those guys that I kind of grew up watching that taught me, that I kind of absorbed from, all do what you're talking about. I feel like maybe with these movies, especially in a complicated movie like this where there's so much information coming at the audience, simplicity and clarity is your #1 goal in terms of the visual storytelling. I find you can't overdo it in terms of look here right now. And also the blocking in terms of being very aware with the camera, the actors in relation to the camera, where the audience's eye is being drawn. And then when you want it to be somewhere else, doing some kind of attention-grabbing move that's going to bring that piece of information in so you know their eye will go to that. I mean, being just incredibly calculated about keeping it clear and simple for the audience and keeping them on track.
There's nothing more complicated than 7 people having a conversation in a living room. Do you commit to a side of the line at the beginning of the day? When you cross the line, do you try to make that a turning point in the scene? Are you specific about where you decide to do that? Well, is that all figured out ahead of time? Or do you end up just shooting enough coverage that you feel like you have options in the edit room?
No, it's for the most part, I come up with it ahead of time. And when I have the luxury of using a line cross as a dramatic hinge point, I do. There's a big scene that happens partway through the movie between Daniel Craig and Janelle Monáe's character where it's a long scene. It's like a 7-minute scene where they're just sitting across a table talking to each other. And because of the length of that scene, I used line crosses as act breaks, essentially, in the scene, and very consciously decided when I would hop over to visually kind of refresh the audience or shake them out. A lot of times, though, for those big groups, essentially, I will plan out my, for lack of a better word, master. There's going to be a couple big shots that are going to encase the blocking and kind of play out big swaths of the scene. But then for a movie like this, it's unavoidable. You need your reaction shots, you need your close-ups. And so then you start doing the round around, and then the horrible math of the line begins, and it's a fucking nightmare.
How many cameras do you like to shoot with at once?
Steve Yedlin, my cinematographer, and I, we've shot everything since I was in film school together. I feel like on The Last Jedi, we learned how to use a second camera. So,
so 2 cameras is the most.
We used 3 on certain scenes in this one because for speed, there were certain days that we just would not have been able to make if at the end of the day when it's time to get all the reaction shots, we would literally spread out around the set and have 3 cameras getting 3 different singles, and that's the only way we could have possibly ground through it all. So there's a couple special circumstances.
You have a 3rd camera ready to dive in for special circumstances.
But I assume, because it seems like, especially I want to ask about Tony Scott, about coming out of the visual tradition, which still making it your own, you very much pay homage, and it's got that in the bones of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ridley maybe uses the most.
Yeah.
I think Tony used a lot. We would usually do 2 or 3 camera setups on Top Gun, but the aerial days where we had 26 or 27 cameras going.
Wow.
Which for my editor, Eddie Hamilton, was almost gave him a nervous breakdown because there's just hours and hours of stuff coming in every day. I think we had 813 hours of footage at the end of the movie that we had to cut into 2.